What, you know what, just to be safe thing you did end up saving your ass later. Learn CPR and first aid. Had to give CPR to a family friend when she collapsed from a heart attack, and thankfully she was brought back after being down for 15 minutes. She only had minor memory problems and mostly just couldn't remember that day. She's still here and kicking years later. Was delivering pizza in a sketchy block of town late at night. Huge apartment complex with multiple buildings. Walking up to the front door, I noticed a couple guys wearing dark clothing about 100 feet behind me walking in my direction. Delivery was on the second floor, and by the time I reached her door I heard the main door of the apartment complex open and close. She used a CC for the order and tipped in cash, so when I was putting the receipt into my bag, where I kept my cash, I actually pulled the rest of the cash out and stuffed it into my inner jacket pocket just to be safe, leaving just the change I had that night in the bag. Started to head down the stairs back out to my car, and two guys jumped out from behind the stairs, and the one had a gun pointed at me and told me to give them the money. I quickly handed them my bag filled with quarters and they took off towards the back entrance of the apartment complex. I never ran so fast in my life back to my car. I wanted to make sure I was as far away as possible before they realized they robbed me of $3.50 in quarters. I dropped my high school girlfriend off, then for some reason I locked the passenger door. Not 10 minutes later I was stopped at a red light and some scummy looking dude tried to open up the door. I have no idea why I locked that door after she got out. I really didn't have a habit of that. No idea what would have happened if that guy got in my truck. Was on a side-by-side vehicle mudding on some property a friend and I were visiting. Mid-ride, I turned to my friend and say, "Hey, you should probably buckle your seat belt. Just in case." Not 1 minute later did he lose control and slide front first into a tree, going about as fast as this thing could go given the conditions. Both of us were okay, but the side-by-side was completely ruined. He looked at me right after and his eyes were as big as dinner plates. My dad lost his glasses once. He was going to just use his old prescription but last minute decided to just go to the optometrist anyway in case something changed. Turns out he had a tear in his retina and was booked for surgery within 24 hours. It was bad enough they said he probably would have gone blind really soon had they not caught it when then did. My stomach had some issues and my doctor sent me for a colonoscopy just to get things checked out. They found one polyp, no big deal, not related to the current problem, and told me to come back in 5 years just in case. I put a Google reminder and forgot about it. 5 years later, I went for the colonoscopy and they found a lot more and said I would have ended up with cancer in 5 to 20 years for sure had I not gone. Instead, they removed all polyps and now I'm regularly going to colonoscopies due to having a syndrome they identified. I'm far away from the age where you normally get a colonoscopy, so I would definitely have got cancer. When you are eligible or if it is recommended, get a colonoscopy. $5 breakage insurance on a rental surfboard. Broke that fucker clean in half in my first 10 minutes. Not my ass, but I was getting ready for school whilst mum was vomiting in the bathroom. She said it was just a stomach bug and to just go to school, but mentioned her arm hurt. Something didn't sit right, so I called the ambulance from downstairs. They arrived and took her into the ambulance. She then proceeded to have 3 cardiac arrests and needed defibrillated each time. A double bypass later and she was up and about within a month. Paramedics told me she would have died 5 minutes after I left, if I hadn't called. Snow chains at the bottom of the mountain. A bunch of cars passed me on a clear road on the way up with several warnings all the way up. I saw a local throwing on chains with no snow in the area. I decided to be safe and put them on. 30 minutes later I was in one of the worst snow driving conditions I've ever seen. Whiteout conditions in a snowstorm that eventually resulted in the complete shutdown of the roads. I passed car crash after car crash with just enough traction to feel somewhat comfortable moving 15 miles an hour. Anyone heading to Tahoe needs chains and chains that fit. Don't fuck around. I don't care if you have a 4-wheel drive. Driving through Tahoe and Mammoth during snowstorms is no joke. Literally sunny with no clouds to blinding white darkness in an hour. Edit, one more thing. If you find yourself near Heavenly and Siri sends you to a snowed over hill that feels too steep, turn around. Unless you have the right setup you aren't gonna make it. Snow chains or not, you will slide. Just take the Harrah's gondola if it's that bad. If you don't already have your own gear, try another resort. Heavenly is uniquely bad for rentals and beginners in general. Had some weird achy symptoms and went to the doctor even though I figured I was probably overreacting. Turns out I had cancer. One day I was attempting to make karaoke for the first time. a kind of Filipino fried mochi, and after I popped them in the oil, I settled in and watched them carefully. I never wear an apron whilst cooking, but for some reason I figured why not this time, and as soon as I stepped out of range of the fryer, they all exploded. Turns out, carioca can form an impermeable shell when fried, so pressure built up inside until they popped and sprayed hot oil all over the kitchen. Of course, I was safely away reaching for an apron and was completely dumbfounded. Made sure to punch some holes in all subsequent batches. Of course, once I cleaned the kitchen, I ate them and they were delicious. 10/10 highly recommend. Edit. For the curious. Pro tip, don't let them explode. Normally I'm pretty impressionable and cave to peer pressure, but this one time when I was younger I was hanging with my friends and a couple of older high school guys I'd only met that day. The girls were all fawning over them but I could tell they were idiots. When they all wanted to go for a drive with the guys, I thought nah, I don't trust these guys and I think it's best I just call my parents and go home. I got a call the next morning from one of the girls who was passenger. One of the high school boys was driving, they'd had a serious crash and one of the girls wasn't wearing her seatbelt and hit her head on the dash and was in a coma for 6 months. She was in intensive care and rehabilitation for years. Still can't believe of all the days I decided not to go with the flow, it probably saved my life. Terribly sad about my friend. We were really close but she never came right and her personality changed. I still wonder how successful she might have been and if we'd still be friends if that hadn't happened to her. Really sad. Was watching my toddler nephew and had found a metal straw somewhere in the house and started playing with it. He was just tapping stuff and waving it around, but I'd just read a story on Reddit about a woman who got completely fucked up by a metal straw when she fell and it impaled her face, so I took the metal one from nephew and gave him a soft, squishy silicone one to play with instead. I'm not exaggerating when I say less than 5 minutes later, he fell like toddlers do and I saw the silicone straw all smushed into his cheek. I had to just sit for a while after that, lol. On a road trip with my siblings and Dad in Latin America, he lived there and we were visiting. On a highway at night, with clouds, no moon, and no lights, this was a new highway that nobody likes taking now, as criminals often leave glass or spikes to puncture tires and rob you, or worse. We were driving and this guy was pulled over and waving for help. My dad stopped behind and the guy was scared and asked if we could light up his car while he changed a flat tire. He was terrified of being out there alone and rightfully so. Dad goes to get out to help and my sister grabbed him and said she didn't think this felt right. Dad assured us it was fine and almost got out, but sister grabbed him again. Right then a car flew by the door right where he would have been. 4 guys jump out, one grabs the man, puts a gun to his head and the others sprint to our car. There was a brief chase down the highway, but luckily their old Corolla didn't keep up with our Jeep, and they gave up after 2 to 3 minutes of driving 170 km per hour. My sister saved my dad's life, and probably ours, by making him stay in the car that extra few seconds. Edit, the guy with a gun to his head lived and was okay given everything. After the chase, we had to turn around and continue on the way we were originally going, as there were no other routes to get back home, unless we backtracked 6 hours. After we passed the vehicle of the man, we saw he wasn't there anymore and we thought the worst. Luckily we ended up passing 4 National Guard vehicles about 2 kilometers later and saw that the man was with them talking to them. To answer, I've never known if the guy was in on it. The timing has always seemed off to me, however the look of fear in his face was so genuine when the guys jumped out that I can remember it perfectly 15 years later. Edit 2, the country in question is Venezuela. Leaving a spare set of keys at the pub that I live above. Went out on St. Patrick's Day and had my coat stolen. I keep my keys in my coat. At 3 in the morning, I had genuinely no idea how I would have been able to get home otherwise. Definitely not some big life-saving moment or anything, but it was a relief lol. What instantly kills the vibe at a party? If the hosts are a couple, and they get into a fight. When someone gets extremely wasted and too out of control, starts to pick fights, has drunk fits, will sprawl on the ground, needs 100% supervision, has to be carried around. You just wanna chill and enjoy the party but you can't cause you're stuck babysitting them. I was at a staff party with an open bar, and it reached the time when the first clusters of guests were leaving. When they went to get their coats from the closet, they discovered a young new team member who we thought had left hours ago. He had stripped off all his clothes, made a nest of jackets, soiled everything, and passed out. Killed the vibe for sure. That one sad drunk who is loud as hell. Someone putting the big light on. A friend of mine announced she had to fart to the entire kitchen while she was intoxicated. She proceeded to shit liquid diarrhea on herself. It hit the floor, it smelled terrible. Party ended before it really ever began. Guess she had some stomach bug or IBS or something. She ended up getting diapers for any gift-giving occasion after. No clue where she ended up, we lost touch a year or so later. Edit. I've had some experts weigh in to tell me nobody with IBS trusts farts, so I'm going to bend the knee to those soldiers battling their own colons and rule out IBS. I'll leave it in though for continuity. When someone gets too drunk and starts arguing. Someone took a shit in the sink at a house party of mine once. That was a buzz killer for sure. One time, my brother, 14 at the time, wanted to see how hard it would be to dig out a 1 meter x 1 meter square hole out of the ground, Minecraft inspired. He spent a good amount of time over a weekend digging, until he got bored. It was mostly finished. Fast forward a couple months. I throw a party at my dad's house and we're having a blast. A bonfire out back and everything. A kind-hearted attendee noticed the pit in the ground and made it his duty to guard the pit, for he did not want anyone to get hurt. Someone got hurt. Spoiler alert, it was him. He fell into the pit, our brave guard. Thankfully, we had a sober person there and they drove him to the hospital, but that instantly killed the vibe at the party. Edit. The end result? He broke his leg pretty bad. Aggressive drunk, s. The two drunkest guys getting into a fight and then hearing one of their GFs start crying and screaming things like "Stop for me please, look at me, this isn't you," etc. before she gets yeeted by being in the crossfire. When someone changes a song before the best part. I've done this and got my dumb ass excommunicated, rightfully. Shortage of drinks when everything is closed. An overdose. In college, when we wanted to wrap up the party at 2 or 3 am, play Dark Side of the Moon. Drops the energy, no one is being asked to leave, people are chill as they head out, no crazy disruptions for the neighbors. Not specifically the vibe killing that the rest of the posters are sharing, but similar. Blanket NDAs are now illegal. What can you finally tell us about your former employer? They bought back a shitload of shares from employees under the pretense of "we know the extra cash is better now than later." And then went public shortly thereafter. The bonus is that the CEO then admitted he was using some of that money to finance his divorce. They misused pandemic assistance funds. I worked for a school district that changed grades to boost graduation rates. Deleted. I worked for the political consultant best known in DC circles for having gotten a dead fish in the mail from Rahm Emanuel. The consultant was a super weird boss. Full of shady business practices, including expensing all of his personal shit like family vacations to the business. But this is the story that tends to blow minds. My former employer had me print out his emails so he could handwrite his responses, which I would type up and send back. EDA, no, I wasn't his assistant lol. He was too cheap to hire one. So he'd pull people off time-sensitive client projects to do this crap, which turned everything into chaos. One of the many reasons turnover was high and the business failed. Our sales department deliberately used deceptively vague language when selling extremely expensive travel packages to disabled passengers. They routinely left caregivers stranded with no accommodation other than the floor or sleeping in the same bed as their patients. They also routinely failed to provide accessible bathrooms for disabled passengers. They also lost/damaged wheelchairs and mobility aids. There was little to no sympathy for these passengers and their caregivers when they rightly complained. When I tried to raise the issue with higher-ups, I was labeled a troublemaker. I left the company back in 2019, but I know nothing has changed in regards to sales. The price for the cheapest trip offered was over 2K CND per person for a 2-day trip. The average booking was 8K for a 5-day holiday. They charge much more now. Can you imagine paying $8,000 and not being able to shower, or your mobility aid being lost? Then when you complain, you are told you were never promised anything, only "we will do our best," or "that shouldn't be a problem." Fucking disgraceful. A publication I worked for completely embezzled from the parent company. The editor-in-chief hired their best friend as creative director. Creative director contracts their husband as a men's fashion editor when the publication had no men's fashion section and was not a fashion-related pub. He was paid thousands monthly on retainer and almost never came into the office, and if he did, he never did any work. On top of that, he was paid usage fees for travel images he took and were printed. That family took a 1-week trip for a story, brought their child, and submitted a $40,000 expense report after for it. Oh, then there were the future invoices for her husband's usage fees for his photos, while they were being paid to be there because it was for a story. Other editors-in-chief from other publications were given a $25,000 clothing budget every year and a daily black car driver to take them to the office. When I worked for another title in the building that EIC submitted a very high expense report which included his groceries. The company would even provide interest-free down payments to EICs for homes, but they stopped doing that. Meanwhile, they ran multiple rounds of layoffs a year, consolidated staffs so they worked across multiple titles, and paid peanuts to regular employees. I was laid off from that company twice within 2 years and they didn't vest my 401k match because both times I missed the cutoff by months. I discreetly took my NDA, I was in charge of them, when I left. My boss is a fucking bitch and not even her kids can stand her. That is all. One of my old bosses reprimanded an employee after the employee called HR to file a complaint about him. This is because the HR employee happened to be a friend of the boss in question, and the HR employee blabbed about it to the boss. The boss did not get fired, but he did get reassigned not long after. Not sure what happened to the HR employee. His son, my manager, was a child molester. He had been raping a 10-year-old girl for a little over a year and only got charged with rape. Not rape of someone under 18 or 16 or whatever, not child molestation. Nope, just rape, and we live in a small town and it's fucking easy to find if you look up his name. And people are still letting him around their little kids. I quit the next day after I found out. I worked for a company that fucked up itself by biting off more than it could chew, and then a competitor went under, which flooded the market and fucked over the company I worked for even more. Most of the company has been laid off by now. CEO went before anyone else. The new CEO? The same fucking shitty CEO that sunk their competitor. Who the fuck would see a competitor fail, have it nearly take themselves down too, and then hire the same fucking idiot a few weeks later? The weather forecasting company I worked at a while back didn't actually forecast. They just copy/pasted products from the National Weather Service and slapped their logo on it. I worked for a great fintech startup that got acquired by another company that was pretending to be a fintech, but was actually a private equity company that would buy and gut competition. The owner of the new company is a real-life billionaire villain. He bought an island and cut off beach access to the locals. A real piece of shit. My team wasn't touched in the acquisition because we were deploying the product to the customers, so we were the ones that brought in the revenue. At one point, the new owner was a huge twat to my awesome boss. At that point we started a mass exodus. 90% of the team left in the next 2 months. This killed a $10 million project and set the fuckers' acquisition goals back by years. 2 different places I worked created roles for minorities with a plan to not retain them so they can hire more minorities to satisfy quotas. If you were any good, they would promote you to a real job and hire another minority. Someone in HR told me the reports only show how many the company hires, not how many they keep. They laid off 160 people so they could afford to give the coup a 30% raise.